All right, yo, what's good? What's good? It's Eddie, artist Eddy Rez. A lot of y'all know me out here in Queens, globally, Miami, wherever. I like to do these every once in a while just to, give people some game, just put people onto different things and get it out, get the message out in the best way I can. So first and foremost, praise to the Most High, Allah, Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, and the Holy Spirit flow through me, help me get this message out. Hopefully, it'll reach the right people with the right, whenever it reaches you, whenever that is, I'm just trying to put people onto some game based on my experiences, things I've read, things I've, music, different things that I've consumed over time, different art, living in this, being out here in New York, New Jersey, Miami, Rhode Island, wherever. So, let's just get right into it. I think it's in the beginning, it's kind of hard to decide how to like really start to paint this stuff because, I really just try to focus on art and music. It's a little bit easier to do it that way because when you're doing music, you could just, kind of speak through code and put it in art, kind of like all the great rappers, artists do. And even in movies, it's the same thing. But when you kind of get into a podcast, it's a little different because you're going direct, and that comes with pros and cons. If you're speaking to the people directly, you become, look at what they did to more recently, this guy, Charlie Kirk. I don't even really listen to him like that, but it's an example where it's like freedom of speech is not necessarily, you have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom of consequence. You become a target. Depending on what you're saying and how your ability to influence and inspire the people or put people onto the truth, which nowadays is not always easy. It's not always they don't want that in essence. So it's kind of it's a lot to kind of encompass into one thing. So I'm just gonna start going and flowing with it, and we're just gonna tackle different topics and go from there. So if I had to kind of break it down, it's like, we got 7 billion people in this world, but there's not 7 billion souls, right? Most people, you go, you're young, you're pure. You're young, you're pure. You come into this world, you're still very connected to source. And then over time, people cut deals, people, different things, and you start to realize the game is a little bit spiritual. And that's when, the closer you get to the 30s, late 20s and stuff like that, people end up, cutting deals with either the devil or whatever it is. People end up, selling their soul, however it goes, the process, or vice versa. Some people go through the redemption process like I went through. And, you find the light and you kind of get tapped in. And it's not a clean process. It's a continuous rise and fall. But with that being said, it's like, I think for a lot of people, my warning is if you're in your 20s, if you're under 20 and stuff like that, you can stop now because ignorance is bliss, but it isn't. What you don't know is hurting you. You don't know it's hurting you, so it can't hurt you, even though it could still be hurting you. So once you get out there, you have fun. But once you know, you can't unsee. Once your eyes are open, I think Dick Gregory says it's like, once you get the goggles from the universe, that's it. There's no going backwards. So that's the process of awakening. And if you're looking for more out of life, if you're looking at the kind of, there's something going on behind the scenes, whether it's, the Matrix, the movie, or different films and stuff that inspire people. But once you get into that, it's like, all right, there's a deeper lens. Some people through sports, they get the message. Some people get it through art. Some people get it through books. Whatever you need, the universe is constantly, and God is constantly putting you on a game of what you need to do what you need to do and flow in the present moment. But once you open those eyes, you can't go back. And so that's just my warning before we get into, details and stuff like that. I'd say that, for me, doing the stuff is just about me being obedient. I'm not trying to be no martyr. I'm not trying to be no, like Kendrick says, he's like, who you trying to be? You want to be the nigga that delivered the message, immortal man. When shit hit the fan, is you still a fan? So it's like, I don't want that. When I was young, maybe at a certain point, but I'm not trying to be a martyr. I'm not trying to be, because what happens? They end up dead. They end up killed. Look at Marcus Garvey. Look at Jesus. Endless examples. Malcolm Martin, Nelson Mandela, Juan Pablo Duarte, Bobby Hemmett, Stephen Darby, Pac, Biggie. The list goes on. It's just like, but at the end of the day, you can't run from your truth or from your message and what you have a calling to do. If you're chosen, you're chosen. You don't have a choice. You're called, you got a choice. If you're chosen, you don't have a choice. If you run from it, you're still gonna get you're gonna get hit. You're gonna get chastised until you go and walk that path. So it is what it is. I think let me see. Certain people were selected to go. Certain people are chosen to bring different messages forth, whether it's through art, movies, again, whatever it is that you were called to do, that everybody's picked for something in multiple things in different seasons. And so, you know, that's just how, God starts to work through people. And from, I got my notes here. I'm just trying to go because it's a lot to unpack, to be honest. It's a lot of information here. And everybody puts it together differently. At the end of the day, there's nothing new under the sun. This is the same game. We're all playing in the same game at different levels of the game, at different stages and different moments in time. Nothing new under the sun is a constant quote that you'll hear, and it's a fact. And so it's like, if the music is kind of giving you the same messages, art, it's all pointing in the same direction. Once you get the eyes and the vision, and you can go backwards too. Like you see a movie that you saw when you was young, and then you see it again when you're older, and you're like, yo, hold on, I didn't peep this. Or you listen to a song as you get older, and you're like, whoa, he was talking about some shit that I didn't even realize back then. So your awareness starts to expand as you continue to get older. Man. And so it's like, this is J. Cole line in that song. What is it? I see the world for what it is now. I see the odds is looking slim for our kids now. So it's once you get to a certain point, and again, I'm still growing. I'm first and foremost, before we even continue, it's like, I am not sinless. I am no saint. I'm far from that. I'm not trying to be a role model. Like I said, I'm just, I peep game and I start to accumulate knowledge and different things. And I'm, you still catch me outside. I'm still the same kid, man. I'm still the same kid from Queens. I'm still, growing just like everybody else. But I, I've learned a couple things in my years. And that I'm grateful for that, the good and the bad. So, I got to know here. All right. So, used to be lost. Definitely ain't perfect. Still have a lot of open doors. Not sin less, but I sin less. And everything in its moment, I think as the older you get, you start to learn discernment, where it's like, all right, learning how to choose where to do things, how to do things in the right moment. And if not, you get to a point where you start to get chastised. The Holy Spirit pull up on you like, yo, we already went through this. Hold on. No. You keep going backwards. And if there's a quote in the Bible that says like a dog returns to his vomit, but you get hit 7 times harder because the demons come back 7 times stronger. So, over time, you just start to like, all right, let me take a step back. Let me, you kind of move a little bit. Now, I'm not going to say slower, but when you're young, you have no kind of regard for things. You just go and you should be. When you're young, it's just like, fuck, I'm controlling the world. I'm face the world. When you're young, you think you're going to rule the world. And then you get old and you're like, you're still, but you get wiser. You get wiser. You get humbled. You get, you just learn that there's bigger things going on here. So with that, it's just like, I mentioned Jesus and his disciples, King David, Malcolm, Martin, Nelson, Juan Pablo Duarte, Dick Gregory, Bobby Hemmett, Stephen Darby, Pac, DMX, Big, Earth, Wind and Fire, Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, you name it, like all these people, they got the codes. They inspire people in different ways, and they inspire me in so many ways. And, they all paved the way, because it's all about just passing the rock for the next generation. That's all we can do, is just pass the rock for the next generation to continue to try to improve things, while understanding that, again, it's still, the game is the game. Nas, Jay-Z, Cole, Nip, Lauryn Hill, so many that they point us in the right direction, for better or worse, of what they had to go through to even get to the point where they were able to deliver the message, and all the shit that they had to go through to be able to peep game. So grateful to all of them, and so many more that I haven't even mentioned, but it's just a couple that I listed here to mention. All right, so we're getting into it. Again, it's, one of my favorite Bob Marley songs and Lauryn Hill songs is like, they got so much things to say, but I'll never forget, no way, how they crucified Jesus Christ. So it's like, in delivering this message, and even in my music, if you go to look at my catalog and different things like that, it's like, still knowing at the end of the day, I'm not doing this for any one individual person. I'm doing it for the people in general, and understanding that it's not about martyrdom. It's not about trying to be a hero, none of that, because all you get arrows in the ass if you're trying to be a pioneer. But you still got to do what you got to do as you're called to do it. And the truth is, we living on borrowed time. I'm not trying to die with all this info inside of me. I'm not, I can't live in fear. There's a quote in the Bible, another one that says, and I'm constantly going to go back to the book, and I'm going to go to different, sources of music and things just to, pull from things. But there's a quote, it's like, fear not him who can kill the body, but fear him that can kill the soul and the body. And so, being aware of that, my fear is of God. I fear nothing else but God. Over time, you kind of go through different trials and tribulations and different things to make sure you test that. But that's the only thing that I could fear. And so it's again, in the beginning, it was like, yo, I'm just trying to do art, to just putting it through music, but I don't have an abundance of resources to just be able to put it through music or make a movie or make this is that. I want to get to the point where I'm able to kind of paint things in a different way, because movies and music, they get people out of their ego. So they're able to soak up the information better and be entertained by it. Whereas like, you do a podcast, it's direct, it's just pure words, it's pure somebody yapping. And some people that, especially like, more, when you get more headspace and stuff like that, collect the information better that way. Especially, over the last couple of years, podcasts have picked up a lot more, but nothing gets people out of their ego more than art, because it's, you're seeing things through the lens of the character and the scenes and this is that. But, it takes an abundance of resources to make a movie. It takes, connections. It takes all these different things. And same thing with music, after a certain point, it's like each track has to go through the mix and mastering process and all that. So sometimes it's easier to just get on a mic and hop on a podcast and do it. Let me see. All right, cool. All right, so intro to self. Before we go any further, it's always good to kind of just give people background a little bit. Again, Eddy, I'm Dominican, full Dominican, born here in Queens, New York. I was born when Illmatic came out, to give you an idea. So literally like I think the day after, whatever. And it was Queens. Queens is the most diverse place in the world. So I've always been consumed by multiple different cultures, all across, different peoples and embracing diversity across the board. And exposed to so much, culture and spirits, because it's one and the other. I went to QCC. I went to high school, obviously in Queens, and I went to QCC. I could have went to St. John's. I was like, nah, that's too much money, and this is that. I was the kind of kid that was like, yo, I could learn anything I wanted to by just reading the books, but ended up, going to college, play the game, really only because of J. Cole, to be honest. The only reason I went to college. And then after that, I could have went to Syracuse. I had different options and stuff like that. I ended up going to Miami after Baruch. I did a year there, and I was like, yo, I got to get the fuck out of the city. Went to Miami, and, it's interesting because like Miami is like, they play tomorrow in the playoff, and it's about to be lit. Hopefully we whip Texas A&M ass. But it's like, Catholics versus convicts was always the battle with Notre Dame. And I'm over here about to put you onto some game from the book. But Miami was the convicts. But life is a paradox where it's like, there's a lot more Christian people in church. There's a lot more Christian people in jail than you may imagine. And there's a lot more demons and witches in church than you can imagine. It's not as clean scripted as people make it seem. So that's just a funny paradox that you get with life. The Israelites, even, and like who are the true Israelites? It's like, what you're told is who the Israelites versus who they really are. If you look at it, like, I'm Dominican, so again, I can talk about, I have the Spaniard in me, I have the African in me, and I have the Native American in me. And, they always like to paint this picture that the Spaniards brought Christianity and Jesus to the world. And maybe for the Native Americans, you can look at history and stuff like that and kind of dive into it. Pangea, when the world was shifting. I don't know the history behind that. So that what I could say is they probably brought Christianity to the Native Americans, but they definitely didn't bring it to the Africans. And, just looking at how you read the Bible and you look at how things kind of moved, you know that they knew when they were bringing the African slaves and they were being sold by other Africans and stuff like that, that they already knew Christianity. They were the people of, not all of them, maybe some of them, I don't know, but what I can tell you for a fact is that there were Africans who were already from the seed of Abraham. If you look at like how the lineage works and how like the Israelite seed works, Jacob wrestled with God, remember? Then he changed his name to Israel. He said, yo, I ain't leaving here until I get my blessing. He wrestled with God. He got his blessing, changed his name to Israel, and his seed became the lineage, right? And then after that, David, his seed, you had the 12 tribes from all the kids of what's his name? Joseph? No, not David. Not David's pops. Benjamin, Simeon, all those the 12 tribes, right? You got those kids. It keeps going down the lineage, and then you get to the point where it's like now Israel are the followers of Christ. That's in Galatians something. You can look it up, and that's what Israel means, right? So like those are the Israelites, people who follow Christ. But the modern world will tell you that the Israelites are, the certain people whose country was created. And I'm not trying to be controversial here. I'm just trying to, give y'all facts. But the nation Israel was created in 1945 or something like that after World War II. And that's the state nation of Israel. But the people in the Bible are not the same as the nation created in Israel. And you can do your research and go further into that. I'm just trying to give y'all some game on that. But from my perspective, I can tell you guys that being from mixed blood, you kind of you go through this process where, as the veil, especially the veil, thinned between the physical world and the spiritual world, kind of, especially at the pandemic, you could see there was a shift. And they painted in anime, they painted in different things where it's like, what's one, Stranger Things? It's popping now. A lot of people watching Stranger Things. It's like they paint the upside down. That's just a symbol for the spirit realm. That's a symbol for the spirit realm. And then another one, it was some anime. It was like Solo Leveling, or he's another one that came out in like the 90s, I think, or the 80s. Wicked City. So all of these, these are people with artists. Like they're giving you game, and it may seem like it's just art and it's just fantasy, but it's not. It's coming from somewhere. Everything is everything, right? So there's a spirit world, and in Stranger Things and in Solo Leveling, they show how like the veil thinned, and the veil definitely thinned in 2020, if you could tell. So like, a lot more dark spirits came in and a lot more light spirits came in, and you got to go through the testing depending on where you were at in your life and where you were vibrating at to understand what spirits could use you. The spirit of Jezebel came through hefty, a lot of people, spirit of rebellion, wrath, you name it, like, and it's still going on. But mixed blood people, especially, there's an internal conflict and stuff like that, because all our history is really hidden, in general, and especially when you got, like, you have a colonizer inside of you, you have the African inside of you, you got the Native American, they all beefing inside of you if you're not kind of like aligned with who you are and knowing your history. It's like, fuck, who do I follow? Who do I listen to? One of them wants to rebel, the other one wants to just kind of follow the Western system. And it's like, fuck. So you go through a process, especially if you're like a first generation person, or you're appointed as the generational curse breaker. You kind of go through this process where you're like, you got to go through that process and you get broken down, and you kind of, one stage you're fully just aligned with one answer, and then ancestor, and then another one, and then another one, and you're like, you kind of keep going through it. And I always think back to like, there's another Kendrick track where he has his cousin. His cousin is talking on like the snippet. He's like, we are a cursed people. Deuteronomy, I think 28 says, the Lord shall smite thee with astonishment. What is it? The Lord shall smite thee with blindness, and this is that, because you chose to follow other gods. He said that the African Americans, and the Native Americans, you and the Hispanics are the cursed people of Israel because they chose to follow other gods, until you come back to these commandments and follow Christ. And again, I'm not saying be no saint, nothing. Everybody got their journey. Nobody's going to be perfect in this world. I'll tell you that. Only Jesus was perfect. But going through that process is like, all right, you start to peep game. You start to see, the more you dive in, the more you understand. And there's one thing is reading the book, but then you go out and live life, and he'll show you. The universe, God will constantly show you. He'll be like, all right, you read this, or you don't leave it. You don't think it's true. All right, let me show you. And so you constantly go through it. That you get more and more info as you continue to pursue the journey and learn, and you soak it up. But that's a fact. Like you think like, Black people and Spanish people, we kind of are promulgated to be boxed in the most in this country, and the most jails are filled with us and stuff like that. And you're like, some people don't believe in God because they're like, why would God allow this? In philosophy, I studied economics and philosophy. One of the big things was the debate about if God is real, and that's probably one of the biggest questions in life. It's like, is God real? A lot of philosophers would say no, because look at all the bad stuff that goes on in this world. And it's like, but if you didn't have the bad, you wouldn't know the good when you finally got to the light again. So it's there for a reason. And if you go to the book of Job, you'll peep where it's like, you could tell God and Satan talk. Like they still communicate, even though there's a big war that's supposed to happen and all that. But they talk. It's like, if you go to the book of Job, he says, yo, Satan pulls up, he's roaming the earth or whatever. He pulls up, and God's like, what you been up to? He's like, oh, roaming the earth. And God's like, all right, what about Job? He's one of my best people out there. He always worshiped me. He stays in line. And the devil's like, yo, but He got a wife, he got kids, you got a hedge of protection over him. Like, he's untouchable. Of course he's gonna worship you. He got no reason not to. And God's like, all right, cool. You could attack his possessions, but you can't attack him. This is the first round. He's like, you can't touch him, but you could touch everything around him. So, he loses his wealth, his cattle, his kids, he loses everything, but he still doesn't curse God. And then boom, and then the next round, devil comes back. He's like, yo, I took everything from him, and he's still, but you didn't let me touch him. You didn't let me hit him. You didn't let me do nothing to him. And God's like, all right, you could touch him, but you can't kill him. And so boom, so that testing comes again, and then he gets these boils and all this stuff, and this is that, and he still doesn't curse God. While his wife, she's like, yo, what are you doing? Still praising God, and this is that, like the fuck, don't you see what's going on? We lost everything. And he's like, nope. He does get to a point where he cracks, but when he finally gets to that point and he's talking to friends and all that, they're trying to, cheer him up. Then God pulls up and he's like, yo, who are you to question me? Like I could do everything. Like, where's your faith at? Who are you to question me? He ends up getting double what he had before, kids again, possessions and all that. But he went through that testing, that pruning. And a lot of people, go through journeys as you kind of go through your process. I can say for myself, I've been through multiple different seasons. I've had a Job season. I've had a Joseph season. I like to think now I'm kind of in my David season, but it's like you go through these seasons similar to your ancestors and different things like that. Once you learn your seed and once you kind of like, he handled this, I can handle this. So whatever, however it is the process, some of the stuff we don't choose. Like if it was up to me, I wouldn't have gone through certain things. But the point is that they talk. I think it was one of the more important things that kind of the book of Job establishes, and the fact that God is stronger than Satan, right? Because Satan, if it was up to him, he would have did what he wanted to, what he did to Job in the limited capacity that he was allowed to. And he would have been able to do that to everybody if it was up to him. And so it shows that, it's what God allows in any test, whether it's witchcraft, whether it's attacks from directly from Satan, whether it's demons, it's only what God allows you to go through. You can't, I think in Numbers it says you can't curse, or in Kings, I don't know, you can't curse someone that God hasn't allowed you to curse. And again, in the book of Job, it's like Satan had to ask for permission, and God gave him limits to be able to do what he did there. So it just establishes kind of the hierarchy. And so at that point, once you understand that, it's like, you got to choose the winning side, obviously. I mean, to each his own. There's everybody got, you got Satanists, you got people who do this and that. And, I listen to a lot of hip hop again and rap, and it's like, DMX talks about his journey. Damien from part one, where it's like, shit, all right, you gonna give me this and that? Fuck, well, what I got to lose? And he's like, like, he's talking about his soul, but he doesn't know that at the time. He was ignorant. And then, you get to part three, where he's like, you forgot about me? He's like, nah, I don't want to do nothing with you. I already peep game. So, you go through, everybody goes through the journey differently. I think, again, music and art are there to point us in the right direction and get to that point. All right, let me see where I'm at with it. And one thing with like being Dominican, real quick, I gotta touch this. It's like, I got certain family members that be like, I know blah. And I got certain family members that are only aligned with black. And Dominicans got both. I'll put it to you straight up. We got both. We get mixed. Some people have more ancestry in one branch than the other. But me personally, I embrace all the sides. I like to, I like to think I've been gifted with all of it, from my athleticism and my physique to my ability to think intellectually and different things like that. And first of all, don't let nobody categorize and put you in a box to what you are just because of your background. But I'm grateful for all of the sides, and I think that even like when it comes to the Native Americans, where it's like, yo, very smart people, obviously maybe weren't fully aligned with the God and this is that, but they had the Tainos believed in what they call it Yukahu or something like that, their God. And it's like, but they were still big on gratitude, nature. So like each had their strengths and weaknesses, and kind of being whether you're Dominican, Colombian, Puerto Rican, whatever it is, Jamaican, like kind of looking at your strengths from each branch that you have, and kind of building on that. So I think that's very important. I, just again, I gotta touch back to the notes and keep going. It's a lot of information to kind of to put out and process as well. So again, yeah, I went to college because of Cole. Yeah. And one of the things that, kind of going through this music journey that I've been going through, besides music, obviously living in New York City, you got to get money some way, somehow. Ended up, I've worked all kind of jobs. I started in retail. I was in high school. I was working at Hollister, Guess. Then I went to hospitality, bartending, restaurants. Went to college, worked like two jobs in college. Ended up working on Wall Street, and I've seen a lot of shit on over there. There's a lot of attacks that you get on Wall Street dealing with certain peoples and things like that, and kind of the greed, the vanity that's involved there. So I've dealt with maybe later I'll get into more of that, but kind of dealing with all the different things that I've seen there. But one of the things that J. Cole put in the climb back, where he's like, what are you making music for? He's like, are you doing this to facilitate growth or to become famous? What's more important, getting or letting go? And so with the climb back, it's one of those things where I had to really sit down after a couple of years. I've been making music for a long time. Whether it started playing guitar, bachata. I started with it after I was playing baseball, and then after that, I put the baseball bat down, swapped it for a guitar because I caught myself in the train just always. And then it started expanding more into poetry. I was always writing. As soon as I got a phone, I was writing on the phone, poetry and notes and stuff like that. And it started building up into rapping and then singing and kind of to get to where I am not today. But I had to really sit down with myself and be like, all right, I'm not really doing this for fame. I'm not doing this for anything outside of kind of the spiritual growth of it, and everything else is a part of it. At the end of the day, I love music. Music is my passion. It's and the main goal, I think, Lauren Hill says it in her MTV Unplugged, is like to be able to do your passion. That's how you serve God, by doing your passion. At the top is kind of your, if you look at like a vibration scale, and peace, joy, love. So it's like everybody wants to be able to do their passion. Now, I'm not going to say communism, and I'll get into a little bit of that later, where it's like, ideally in communism, everybody would do their passion, but then everybody gets paid the same. I don't think that works, because if you look at the history of communism and how in socialist places, who eats the best? The politicians and the people who control the resources are the ones that eat the best. If you look at capitalism, you kind of have more opportunity. Look at why everybody wants to come to America, go to certain places, because of opportunity. And that doesn't mean that you'll be able to kind of only do your passion, but you'll be able to have a better opportunity to eat better, to climb the ladder. Now, whether we get into how the middle class has kind of been disappearing over time, and you have the super rich and you got the poor, and the in between is really not as existent as they make it seem. Separate topic, but I guess the point is like, I've been blessed with the ability to at least have a shot at making music while still surviving in New York City. And, even though everybody wants more and stuff like that, I've had to be humble to the point where, just acknowledging at a certain point, I was part of the 1% of globally. If you're making six figures plus, you're part of the 1% globally. If you think about like, so acknowledging that, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to be able to build a music career without the resources, without especially being an independent artist. If you're not signed to a label, you're cooked like in the beginning, unless you have a big bag of resources and then this is that and you're chilling. But you're competing against people in labels that have millions of dollars to be able to pitch and market and all these different things. And so understanding that, I'm grateful that I even be able to get to the point that I've gotten to with the resources and opportunities and talents that I've been given. Um, and with that, it's like, yeah, it doesn't get easier. You only get stronger. I got that here. The game does not get easier. Does not get easier. I'm sorry to break it to anybody who thinks that may be the case. It will not get easier. You only get better. You get stronger. You get more skills. You get wiser, and you just build on that. Yep. Establish the two sides, spiritual and physical. All right. So women and men inherently different. I like to think most women, again, if I had to say, it's like a bell curve. Like you're still gonna get people that fall on one end or the other and kind of the middle. But most women are like cats. They can see into the spirit realm more than men. And most men, we're fully focused on, like left brain, problem solving solutions at, conquer sports, whatever, however you may look at it. So for the most part, women have more of a spiritual eye naturally. Now, some men do have that gift. We could get into the spiritual gifts later, and like discernment being one of them. But more women will have it, I think, overall, and I could be wrong, but I think, just what I've seen over time, women tend to pick up things a little bit quicker on that on the other side more. Um, so I got that, and kind of going into like there's multiple planes of existence. They got the astral plane, which is the emotional plane. You got the logic plane or the logos. You got the one plane. You got the obviously the physical plane, which most people only see and operate on, which is the 3D. So there's multiple planes, and you can access these different planes at different times. Some people, sometimes again, people do different things, whether it's mushrooms and psychedelics, whether it's sipping lean, even liquor, weed, whatever it is. Some things help kind of bridge the gap. Other times it's just what's happening out in the air. The Holy Spirit can help you, kind of see through multiple things as well. And over time you kind of get to the point where you're like, I only want to deal with the Holy Spirit, because you know what comes with dealing with other spirits and entities. If you get to that point, and everybody can summon spirits. It's not everybody. I mean, I don't know that, but what I would say is that, like, it's not defined by race or color. Like, everybody's ancestors can kind of tap into them. Even atheists, I think, get used a lot, even though they don't believe in anything. And it's like you can be used, especially if you don't believe in something. You don't have that hedge of protection to be able to kind of have something helping you out there. So that's just a quick game on that. Some people are allowed to kind of go through these realms. Some people, they will get into kind of more, whether it's the 5%ers, they say 5% see, 5% that see, 10% that do, the rest, whatever, kind of just going through the motions of life. Some people call it the 144,000, which would be, if it's 5%, if it's 5%ers, or if it's 144,000, I mean, 5%, we're looking at like what? 7 billion people, 5%, we're looking at like 350 mil people or so. If it's 144,000, we're talking about less than 1% of the population. So some people say the 144,000 isn't literal. Some people say that it's a frequency, what is it, A440 or 1 for 40. So there's different things on that. But if it's 144,000 that are only given these certain abilities, that's less than a percentage of the 7 billion. So it's something to note there. Let me see. Other states, dark, light, and darkness. You only lose if you fall to fear. If you got the light, I think Dick Gregory said it's like, you're a match in a dark room. Like, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. You only lose if you fall victim to fear. You gotta shine your light no matter what. Don't shrink. Don't bend. No matter how many numbers, no matter the size of whatever opposition you may be facing, you have to shine. You have the light. You have that ability. And DMX in the song, you got Ready to Meet Him, where he's like, ready to meet him, where I'm living ain't right. Black hate white, white hate black. It's right back to the same fight. But the real war is to follow the law of the Lord. So he's talking about how, like, in America, it's like, and before we get into that, it's like with DMX, I had a conversation. I was in a boxing gym one time, and this pastor comes up and he's talking on, we're exchanging certain dialogue on the word. But I brought up DMX, and he's like, oh, no, 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 no. We don't fuck with DMX. He sold his soul to the devil, and this is that. I'm like, are you sure he didn't get redemption? Like, but if you listen to his music, he talks about his journey. He talks about his struggles, and kind of him always trying to get back to God despite the devil always being on his ass and all the shit that he's going through, and this is that. So in that song, he's talking about how, in America especially, where it's like it's black versus white. It's this constant thing that they're painting. It's black versus white, black versus white, when there's a bigger battle going on between the dark and the light. And that's what DMX was talking about in that track. And he's like, Lord, you left me stranded. And God's like, nah, I never left you. Your ego and your pride let you go in a certain direction because you don't listen. You just want to be on that route. And I let you rock. And look, you come back. I didn't forsake you. I just let you do what you wanted to do. And now you're back. And we could go through the process to clean you up again. So I always think that track is very interesting. And he starts it off with a prayer. Most, I'm not gonna say most. I mean, I'm not trying to generalize in any way with anything I say here today. But a lot of pastors are afraid of the darkness. A lot of Christians. I personally, I don't go to church. All of my knowledge is kind of the internet, what I've gone through in my own life, and reading the Bible myself, and reading not only the Bible. I've read the Upanishads. I've read different books, a lot of philosophy. So I've read a lot of things, and I've gotten to the point where it's like I peep game. I resonate with certain things. But you can go straight to source, and maybe they don't want you to know that because a lot of churches are business. But and some people, it's harder. I think some people need somebody to kind of steer them in that direction. But some people can go straight to source. Some people have been gifted that ability to connect straight to the source. And if you'll notice over, as I start to expand more on this stuff, it's like witches and warlocks can also see into the spirit, and they know scripture, and they know different anything that you may think that only a believer will know, they know as well. So you have to get a better discerning eye than just thinking, oh, this person got a Jesus piece, or this person knows a quote, or this person got the Bible quote. Nah, it's not that simple. Like they know scripture, they know that, and but the big thing is that they need your energy. If you're one of them ones, if you connected to source, you can go into isolation and you're still connected to source. You don't need any outside stimulation to kind of create and alchemize in different ways. Whereas they need, how you differentiate is that they need to feed off other people's energy, and that's a big thing that I've noticed over time. But the information is out there. I think even Kevin Gates mentioned it and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where again, some of them are just afraid of darkness, or they're just not tailored for it, and so churches kind of steer away from talking about certain topics, and you got to go through whether it's hip hop, whether it's movies and different things to be able to get insights on these kind of things. All right, now we're gonna get start getting more into that. So another DMX track I like, "Look Through My Eyes," where he's like, take away hate. Now I'm supposed to love the one that cursed me, the one that wouldn't give me a cup of water when I was thirsty. It was always him versus me, but now I gotta teach him personal feelings put aside, cause now I gotta reach him. What I like to do is turn my head and act like I don't know him, but it seems like I've been called on to show him, so I'ma show him. And if you never met me, then you no right to judge me. I got a good heart, but this heart could get ugly. So what's he saying? He's like, yo, like, okay, God, you want me to teach him. You want me to, but the same person that tried to curse me or that cursed me or try to kill me or whatever could be going on. He's like, yo, personal feelings put aside, because now I got to teach him because you're telling me to. And I got to put my pride and my ego aside. It's like, shit, I'm petty. I'm angry. I'll throw down you know, there's, if again, Jesus was perfect, but not everybody's like that, especially, New York and this is that. Like New York feeds off of, and I could start to get into like each city and each place in the world has energy. So like certain cities have more of a certain vice or a certain virtue, and just naturally, like certain cities have more. Miami, for example, more lust than general globe, or Vegas. They call Vegas Sin City. New York, Philly, more envy and stuff like that. So like understanding that, you know, you kind of got to be cognizant of where you're at, and you can move and kind of go where what fits with your personality. But what I will say is that I'm not definitely not perfect. So I'm here. I'm trying to give game, and I'm trying to get these message out in the best way that I can. But that doesn't mean that certain things that have been done towards me, I'm fully forgiving, and I'm trying to get to the point where I think I saw Deion Sanders post the other day. Is like forgive and live, and it's like yes, but like you also want justice, and they say vengeance is the Lord's. Now, if somebody's on your body is trying to rob you, and this is that, nah. There's this notion of like Christians being soft and this is that, when that's far from the truth. I think you got to understand that God makes everybody to be the way He wants them to be in their design. Everybody has a purpose, a calling, and a unique build. Now, I mean, there are one of ones, and then there's familiar spirits, and getting into familiar spirits is like the more you kind of grow, you'll see the Matrix paints it, where it's like the NPCs and this is that, but people have familiar spirits. How do you get familiar spirits? It can be through the bloodline, ancestrally, through the ancestor bloodline. It could be through the city. It could be through soul ties and sex with the same person. But people can get familiar spirits, and it's I kind of you get to a point where it's pattern recognition. It's like, oh, whoa, I've dealt with this energy before. I've peeped this before. I've dealt with people like this before, and music is vibrations and frequencies. So like for me, I barely even engage with words at this point. Like words are very important because it's spelling. The root is spelling, but frequency speaks. And so as a musician, it's like you could be saying the nicest thing in the world, but your energy is this way, that I could peep it. And I think a lot of artists and musicians are, get to that point, and that's another aspect of discernment. But it's like, you know, it's hard for me to get to a point where like knowing certain things that have occurred in my life where it's like, yo, or whether it's witchcraft, whether it's attempts at this, that, and the third, robberies, whatever it may be. But it's like, yo, I'm supposed to forgive when if I see this person, I'm like, I'm ready to rage out and wild out. But it's like, how they wanted to see you, jealous snakes, rats, and people like that. Like, fuck, I'm supposed to be the disciple. So I'm supposed to turn the other cheek. And that's where it's like, I think every man has this, and even women have this internal Huey versus Riley, or this yin versus yang, this Malcolm versus Martin. And, I think the big thing is like choosing your battles and trying to rise above, which is always easier said than done. Always easier said than done. And you got to get to the point where you understand that you're fighting the spirit, not the person. You're dealing with the spirit behind the person for the most part. So I think what is it? Ephesians 6:12. It's like, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high and low places. So getting to the point where you kind of, it's like, all right, is it even worth kind of going that route? And sometimes it is. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it is. Lord, forgive me if I'm not trying to steer no one in the wrong direction, but you just know how it is out here in the streets and in this world. That being said, you're dealing with the spirit no matter what. 99% of the time, you got to be cognizant of that. But the 3D, the physical, is the immediate faculty. So you got to be able to handle it in the physical to protect yourself while being aware that everything happens in the spirit first. It's like, spirit, mind, body is how I like to look at it. Things happen first in the spirit. People talk about mental health and different things that, especially after the pandemic, shit, the city was a shit show. But I listen to and I read a lot of different psychology stuff as well. Like Jung is big on empaths and kind of the abilities of empaths to feel energy, to to sometimes take energy that's not theirs, and carry certain things for people that's not even that they didn't intend to, they weren't aware of. But I think also understanding it's a spirit thing before it gets into psychology. So it's like understanding that you know there's something working through the person, even though modern science and different things are going to call it just pure psychology. I think a lot of it has to do first with spirituality and kind of what's going on in the spirit before it's psychology. So a lot of people got to get delivered and different things like that. You can do self deliverance, and there's many levels to it. The deeper you go, you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. But the point is understanding that, like, it goes spirit, mind, body. Another verse I'll give you is this Freddie Gibbs, where he's like, it's not in my nature to hate. He's like, what does he say? A lot of shit broke my heart, but it fixed my vision. So he's talking about how like every bullet that I send out, it might come back with my name on it. And so being cognizant of that is like we're supposed to kind of try to rise above and walk that righteous path despite what may be going on around us, and leave it all to God. And if you're fully, kind of walking in your alignment and your authority, because the Bible does say you have authority to trample over snakes and scorpions and kind of walk over it, you're chilling. But if you have open doors, it's not always the case. Or sometimes, again, God will allow what He allows for you to be able to see certain things. The weapon will form, but it will not always prosper, because sometimes He wants you to see certain things. He's like, yo, this person's trying this on you, or this person, yo, that's not your friend. That's whatever it may be. He wants you to be able to see certain things, so He allows certain things. Or it could be that you have an open door, whether it's ancestral, whether it's whatever sin you're kind of indulging in at the time there, you have an open door, and through that they're allowed to attack you in different ways, and they have a claim on you because of that. So kind of being aware of those different things, it's like you got to get to the point where it's like knowing what's if there's any mischief going on in your life, was it from you, or was it from somebody from your past or your ancestors, or is it somebody around you? And you'll get the downloads on that over time. Stay away from people and groups who are fixated on misunderstanding and misinterpreting you if you don't fit into the bucket they want you in. And I'll start to elaborate more on, like, kind of friend groups and how stuff like that works and different things like that, and then the energy transfers behind it. But in a nutshell, it's that. It's like, yo, like, people are constantly fixated on misunderstanding you. Separation. Walk your path. So, getting into detail for me, it's like, I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. I mean, definitely, again, I've gone through certain things where it's like I could talk about certain topics. One of them being like witchcraft and stuff like that, where it's like there's people that have tried certain things and I've peeped it. And I'm like, yo, like, what the fuck? And they'll still try to smile in your face. You got to be cognizant of it. And it's like, yo, I would hate me too, because they end up hating you if you survive. And again, I think it's more spiritual first, but narcissism is a psychological disorder. There's a bridge between like narcissists and empaths. And then, I think a fully integrated human is kind of a blend, right? You don't want to be too much on one side. If you're too narcissistic, then you can't connect. And if you're too empathetic, then, you're fully drained all the time because you're just giving out energy and helping and this is that. So you kind of want to be a bridge of both. But a narcissist will blame you for surviving what they tried to do to you. And you got to be like, yo, what the fuck? Like, people are sick. So you got to be cognizant and aware of that. It's like, yo, boundaries with that person. If God shows you certain things, or if you peep it just in yourself, it's like, yo, be very careful with certain people when it comes to that. But again, I mean, I would hate me too if I spent money, energy, resources trying to bring somebody down and they still shining, they still living life, glowing, leveling up. And that's what I've dealt with certain things in my life where I can laugh at it now. It's like, yo, y'all are crazy. Y'all are dead ass. I'm gonna be frank with y'all. Y'all are dead ass crazy for trying certain things. But you leave it to God. I give him credit because in certain moments it woke me up to certain things, and we all gotta grow and we gotta be aware of certain things that could happen in the world. Again, going back to art, it's like they give you, like the game, they have to give you the game, or they reap karmic laws. So a lot of art and movies they allow to get shown because that's how they think they avoid karma, by letting you at least see what's going on, whether it's through an art and different, like the what came out recently, that movie Weapons, where it's like they're showing you how they do witchcraft. They're showing you that. What's another one that came out recently? I mean, it's just a bunch of shit. Like they have to allow these things to be put out because of the karmic laws, is what people say. If you look at King David in the book of Psalms, he talks about it a lot, where it's like, the second that David was anointed, Saul was tight. Saul couldn't handle it, but Saul was the one that was anointed before. And so what happened? Saul and Saul's wife, what did they try to do? They tried to kill David in multiple ways: backdoor tactics, witchcraft, to the point where none of that shit worked. And then what did he try to do? He tried to hit him with a spear. That shit didn't work. So all that is just like understanding that these things happen over time with people, and people can try many different things. Shit, my You pause it real quick. Um, we did 10. We doing? Oh, you got another session coming in? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got you. I got you. I got you. Let me start wrapping up then. I think the big thing with all that is like you don't want to carry no bitterness, no unforgiveness. You want to keep it pushing. Stay in a high vibration, but be aware of the darkness. That's the best thing that I can say. Just be aware of it, let it go. Even though Pac says revenge is the sweetest joy, understand that. Pick your spots and let God handle most of it. All right, I'm gonna stop. I have to start moving. Energy. Everything is energy. So it's touch. It's I like to think about it like a basketball concept. It's like touching your ball, boom, the energy comes back. The ball comes back. Sometimes, ideally, if it's in a friend group, it's like you pray for each other, you grind for each other, you hustle. That energy stays within the group, and you uplift each other. But if one person is sneaky and they're trying to not kind of give back that energy, then you peep it and it doesn't reciprocate. You kind of want to cut that off. Um, and you got to be aware. Sometimes people can transfer things to you via touch as well. A good example of that is the Denzel movie Fallen. Peep that movie. Definitely recommend it, and it shows a lot of that. Let me see. Listen, man. Ultimately, many are called, few are chosen. And how do you know the difference? You don't have a fucking choice if you're chosen. You gotta walk the shit regardless. And chances are you had a harder life. Probably never get fair fights. It's probably groups against you. It's probably systems, institutions against you and different things like that. And you still got to keep pushing. A lot of people get into art, um, music, big thing. You notice that, and you deal with a lot of isolation. You deal with a lot of isolation and different things like that because you absorb so much without even trying. Your teachers probably hated you. You probably pick up information quick, super quick, faster than the average person. You just get put on. And not everybody's the same. Some people are meant to walk the dark path. Some people are meant to walk the light path. That doesn't mean that they're not God's children. They just, some people get both, and kind of understanding that. The church will tell you otherwise. Everybody can walk in the light, and this is that. Not the case. Some people are meant to walk through that fire. And if you're an empath, I suggest you look into Carl Jung. He got a lot of studies on it, on different things that you can do to kind of, you know, hone your abilities to be able to protect yourself as well. Let me see. All right, and then before I go, I'm gonna have to touch one topic on, look, America, man. Like, America has to understand that they can't just look at somebody and know whether they're a naturalized citizen or not. I had a situation. I was in Yankee Stadium, and they were trying to, they were getting on these different people, whatever. And I'm like, yo, God, I hope these white boys don't try to fuck with me, because you know how I could get. They were throwing popcorn at these Spanish girls, and this is that. They got into it with the white guys, and next thing you know, and I didn't even know the day before, Bad Bunny had an issue with he didn't stand up for God Bless America, but it's not the national anthem, so you're not necessarily forced to stand up. Most people go to the bathroom, and this is that. Next thing I know, the God Bless America pulls up. I'm at the stadium the day after, chilling, whatever. And they're like, oh, go back to your fucking country. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, I hope they don't get into it with me. And they start talking to me, and I'm like, oh shit, here we go. Long story short, it's like, what country? If I was born here. So it's like, but the media and the system right now where things are going, it's like they're making it seem like anybody Spanish is not a naturalized citizen. And you can't tell just by looking at somebody. It's like stop and frisk. It's kind of giving people an excuse to categorize and stuff like that without even having any background info. So you can't look at somebody and know whether they're a naturalized citizen or not. But they keep trying to do that. So in that situation, I mean, luckily I avoided. I grabbed the kid and this is that, and I'm like, yo, do I really want to get banned from Yankee Stadium for life? And it was two of them. I'm like, do I want to get banned from Yankee Stadium for life, or worse, if I toss this kid and it hits his head? This is that. Then I get a manslaughter, attempted murder. So luckily, they handled that situation. Somebody else called security, whatever. But my point is, like, America has to understand, like, you can't look at somebody and know whether they're naturalized or not. And you know, we have to do better. We have to do better as a country with that, because we're stronger if we are together. But the whole issue with America is always going to be this black versus white thing when there's a bigger battle going on. And hopefully it doesn't take a World War III to get, because having an outside enemy, whether it's a friend group, whether it's a family, whether it's a country, is always going to make people unite more. It's just natural. It's just how things work. But hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But there's a lot of shit that's been hitting the fan right now with it. So that's just my 2 cents on that. All right, cool, cool. I'll do another one of these hopefully soon. Appreciate y'all always, and a lot of good things coming in the next year, man. Appreciate y'all, love y'all, and hope some of this information will help somebody.